Food for Thought is a listener-supported podcast. As a supporter, you get bonus episodes, access to our private chat community, early bird specials, and so much more. Thank you for valuing this podcast and keeping it going by supporting it. At joyfulvegan.com, just click on donate or go straight to patreon.com/Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Today's topic is traveling to Africa, planning and preparing a dream trip as a vegan. Welcome to Food for Thought, everyone. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. I am your host. Today's episode is brought to you by Plain Products, a fabulous vegan-owned company offering cruelty-free, zero-waste personal care products free of animal products and featuring a convenient, innovative refill system that is closing the loop on waste. I use these products, I love these products, and I love passing them on to you. Basically, you choose your products when you're ordering your shampoo, your conditioner, your body lotion, your body wash, whatever. You choose your fragrance, no fragrance, or mint and rosemary, or citrus and lavender, and you choose a pump if this is the first time you're ordering. And then you enjoy whatever you bought. When you're running low, you order a refill, and when the new products arrive, you switch pumps and return the empty bottles in the same box and using the label for free. Plain Products sanitizes the aluminum bottles and refills them, closing the loop on waste. If you visit joyfulvegan.com/hair now to get your exclusive 15% discount link and code on all Plain products, you can use that code, you can use that link every single time you order. 15% off every single time you order. I know you're going to become a fan as well. Head over to joyfulvegan.com/hair and reduce plastic use and close the waste loop. I hope you're doing fabulously well, everyone. We just returned home from Northern Italy and Croatia, hosting and scouting. We were hosting a trip to Northern Italy with 20 some folks. And then afterwards, we left Northern Italy to go to Croatia for the first time. We hadn't been there before. We were in Split and Dubrovnik and Korčula and some other places. And the reason we were scouting is because you've probably heard the exciting news. We have a new vegan adventure added to our list of trips that we host, and that is sailing around the Adriatic on our own private yacht. This is next year in 2025, so you have plenty of time to book and plan. But there's only a couple spots left. We sold out of the first trip in a few days, so we added a second one. Please make it worth me being there 2 times in a row and sign up today. It's going to be so incredible. We toured our boat when we were there and we confirmed some incredible land excursions that will remain a surprise. But in the meantime, if you would like to, I say register, book your spot, grab your spot before it sells out, just go to joyfulvegantrips.com. You'll also see our next Japan departure for April 2025 that also sold out, but get on the wait list because you will then be at the top of the list for 2026's Japan trip. Hopefully, by the time you hear this, you'll also see our next trip to the Dordogne in France, and we're going to be announcing that soon if it's not already on the website. And finally, my authentic vegan ramen online cooking class is confirmed. It's definitely happening. So if you'd like to become a master at ramen, which I'm obsessed with, even having just been to Italy, I am full on back into my ramen routine. You're going to learn how to make the broth. You're going to learn how to make the toppings, and we'll talk all about the noodles. These are the 3 components of ramen, so I hope you can join me for that. That's at joyfulvegan.com. Okay, today's episode is a remix. It's a refresh. It's not a rebroadcast. I rewrote this episode, and I've re-recorded it. I don't usually do that, but when I first recorded this topic back in 2016, which is a long time ago now, we hadn't been to Africa yet. And so I recorded the episode as a way for people who are interested in traveling to Africa to prepare. How do you prepare? What are the things you need to know? What are the vaccines you need for different countries? What are the things to be aware of? What countries in Africa are the best ones to visit? Which ones were we going to? So it was all part of my own planning process to share it with you. However, we've been there now half a dozen times and to different countries, and I'm going to get into all those details. And I thought it was time to re-record because I have so much to share with you. And I hope you still listen, even if you're not planning a trip to Africa. There's just a lot of things to say about going to this continent. And this is not in any way an episode on the politics or history of different African countries, but that's really tied into traveling to this continent because it is so complex and it's had such a tumultuous history for the last couple centuries at least. And so I think this might be interesting to you, even if you're not interested in going to Africa, but I hope you would be because it is one of those places. I mean, I'm saying places because it's a huge continent with 58 countries, but it really is true for anyone I've ever talked to who's been to any country in Africa. And now we've been to four and some of them several times. It really gets in your bones. I mean, I don't know. There's something I've speculated about, this is where humans started was in this continent. I mean, this is where we began. And I wonder if there isn't something to that where you just really feel the roots of, I don't know, I feel the roots of our species, of our beginnings when I'm there. And it really feels that primal. And that's a really good feeling. It feels really good. And so that's why I say it gets in your bones because everyone I've ever spoken to who's been there, any country, goes back. And it's certainly been the case for us. So when we first went in 2016, it was our first time, and we went to Rwanda, Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And out of that first visit to Africa, I really can say confidently that that's kind of also the origins of Joyful Vegan Trips. It's a long story, and I don't want to get into the details here, but it was then that Seb and Bridie, who now run World Vegan Travel. At the time, they had become friends. They were podcast listeners who became vegan. They, Bridie at least, became a volunteer and they became friends. And so we started traveling together. We just went to our 20th country. So Croatia was the 20th country we've been to together. And as we started traveling, Seb and Bridie just kept saying, like, this could be a trip where we do a group trip together because they had come on a group trip. They had come on two group trips that I ran with, that I hosted with another company who I will never host with again because it was not a positive experience in the end for me. I was really concerned about my brand and reputation because it definitely was not the right fit for me. Bridie and Seb had come on both of those trips in 2014 and 2015 as travelers, as friends. And so after that, we were all very clear that I was not going to host trips with this company again. And Seb and Bridie, having had a background in tour leading, said, we could do this together. And I was very skeptical because I had just had not a horrible experience, but it was not a positive experience. And I did not want to put my name and trust my brand and name to anyone else again. But they kept insisting. And finally, it happened. But it was when we were in Africa and especially when we were in Rwanda, especially Seb kept saying, this could be a CPG trip. This could be what became called a joyful vegan trip. And so that's the beginning really of them planting these seeds, and eventually Seb basically put together a trip to Thailand, and that was in 2017, and that's how it all began, and that's why I still host trips with them, and now they have their own business because it was such an amazing experience and continues to be an amazing experience. And anybody who's been on a World Vegan Travel trip, whether I've hosted it or not, can attest to the fact that what they do is pretty incredible. So that's why I continue to entrust my brand and name and time with them because it's incredible. And it really started here in Rwanda. I had an affection for Rwanda for many years. Prior to going, I had read Gorillas in the Mist, and I knew about the history of the gorillas and Dian Fossey, and was also certainly interested in the genocide that had taken place in 1994. And I had been wanting to go to Rwanda especially, so it wasn't difficult to pick the countries we were going to. We knew that it was going to be Rwanda first and foremost. And so one of the other reasons that it became clear to me that I could work with Seb is because preparing for a trip is overwhelming, and taking care of all the logistics can be overwhelming. And Seb started doing that for just the four of us when we would travel together. He's very good at it, Bridie as well, but it was Seb and continues to be Seb who tends to do these kind of low-level logistics like the trains and the, kind of the transportation and all the details we need to know. And so, having learned so much about what it entails, I wanted to share it with you and pass along anything that might be helpful for you wherever you're going in Africa. But frankly, I think a lot of what I'm going to talk about can help you with any trip anywhere in the world, to be honest. Now, there are basic things like knowing what to pack and what to bring and what the weather's like, and do I need repellent, mosquito repellent wherever I'm going. But preparing a trip to a continent like Africa that is so different from North America or Europe can be overwhelming and intimidating. And I say this for many reasons, not the least of which is the way in which Africa is still depicted, when it's depicted at all in the news. And that depiction still tends to be through a lens that highlights its many challenges: poverty and conflict and political instability and disease. And some of that is true. But I think the portrayal of Africa as a whole being depicted in that way can create a narrow and sometimes negative view of an entire continent that is made up of, I think I said 58 before, it's 54 countries. 58 is in my head because there's 58 counties in California, and we have a quest to sleep in every county in California. So it's 54 countries in Africa, 58 counties in California. But the media's focus tends to fluctuate between disasters and crises when it comes to reporting on any country in Africa, which I think can sometimes overshadow positive developments and successes within the continent. And I also think it continues to instill fear. I know it. I see it when I talk to people about going to Rwanda or Botswana, wherever in Africa, and I see people just still have this real concern about this continent. And I think I certainly have been grateful to be able to, in my own small way, distill myths and hopefully instill a sense of wonder and awe about so many places we've been to, rather than fear. Now, the truth is, in many countries in Africa, there have been significant challenges. There continues to be economic underdevelopment, and largely that's due to the transatlantic slave trade that spanned the 16th to the 19th centuries, and due to the colonial exploitation of the late 19th and 20th centuries. Now, colonialism was bad enough. It's bad enough, but the abrupt departure of the colonial powers in name a country, in any of the countries, often left a vacuum that left a space for corrupt, self-serving dictators to seize control and further exploit their own people. And of course, the transatlantic slave trade profoundly impacted many African countries, especially those in the west of Africa: Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Angola, with millions of Africans being forcibly removed from their homes, leading to population decline and demographic disruption. Internal conflicts erupted as communities were torn apart and economies were reoriented towards capturing and selling slaves. Furthermore, the arbitrary borders created by Western colonial powers exacerbated conflicts among groups with pre-existing animosities, deepening the social and political challenges that persist today. So these issues are compounded by political instability, inadequate infrastructure, limited access to education and healthcare, and so on. So there are challenges in many of these countries in Africa. They are real, but not only is Africa a diverse continent with 54 countries, each with its own story and unique experience, it's also an amazing place if you're at all interested in rich cultural heritage and breathtaking landscapes and vibrant traditions and just an incredible array of flora and fauna. I am. I'm interested in all those things, including resilient people. Despite what continues to be, I think, biased, fear-based stories about Africa, it is just it's just an incredible place, and I'm really grateful to have experienced it, and it's why we keep going back. So let's talk about the hows, the whys, the wherefores, where to go, what to know, what to do. And I'm not going to be getting so low level that, turn left on this road and you'll see the thing. And this is going to be hopefully high level enough that it's interesting for you whether or not you go to Africa. So I mentioned that Rwanda had been top of the list for me. Top of the list for me because of my affection for and interest in the mountain gorillas and the work Diane Fossey had done early on. And she has been a long time hero of mine, complex though she is. And we obviously weren't going to go to just one country. If you're going to travel that far, it's worth going to more than one. So I will say that to you. And if you're able to kind of go to ones that are nearby each other, that's going to be helpful. But in the end, it's a massive continent. So you're going to probably take intercontinental flights because not everything is just a drive away. This isn't Ireland. This isn't England. It's huge. It's huge. And so what I would recommend to you is what we did, which is, okay, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want to get out of it? And so Rwanda was the first thing because we wanted to see mountain gorillas. We wanted to go on a safari and we wanted to do it in an ethical way. We didn't want a lot of vehicles crowding around the animals. We also wanted to go and see a place we had never been before, but everyone had raved about, and that's South Africa, to go to Cape Town and go to the wineries and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of the beginning. It's like, what do you want to see? So what, where, when, how, and who, right? What do you want to see? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? And when's the best time to go to do those things? How do you want to go about making it happen? Do you want to do this on your own? Do you want to go as part of a group? Do you want to go on a private tour? And who do you want to go with? And I don't just mean what friend do you want to go with or your partner. I mean, who can you get help from on the ground? And so start with that. Start with absolutely what you want to see and go from there. Not everybody wants to go to see mountain gorillas. Not everybody wants to go to safari. Maybe you want to go trekking. Maybe you want to go on a hike. Maybe you want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. So it really depends on what you want. So start there, obviously. Now, I can't speak much about the places outside of the countries we've been to, other than what I know from books. And I do read a lot, and I have read many books on all the countries in Africa, especially pre and post-colonial times. But I'm going to focus on the ones that we've been to. And I still think what I'm saying will apply to other countries, even if I haven't covered them here. And so that's the first step. Decide what you want to see, what you want to do, and then decide the best time to go. So we knew the best time to visit Rwanda for gorilla trekking are during the dry seasons. And that's something you're going to want to be aware of because obviously there's a lot of rainy seasons in different countries in Africa, and there's dry seasons as well. And so the dry season in Rwanda typically occurs between mid-December and early February, and then also from June to September. Because in those other times when it's raining, they don't even have gorilla treks because it's so muddy. You can't get to see the gorillas. It's really tough. In fact, I'm thinking when we were there in 2019, yeah, when we were there in 2019, they had so much rain, and we were there in no, we were there in, no, we were there in June, which, typically would have been dry at that time, but they had had so much rain that, oh my gosh, I will never forget our trek up to Diane Fossey's. You can go up to where Diane Fossey lived and where she had her research station. The gorillas aren't up there. It's just it's a separate thing altogether. It's a separate hike we offer people. They can do that on their own. And we had arranged for it for me and for a few other folks. And like if you didn't step correctly, you would have lost your shoe because the mud was so thick and so wet. It just would have taken your shoe. And so it was a very long trudge uphill in the mud. But it was wonderful, and we got there to the top, and it was incredible. So you really want to make sure you're checking the time of year and what the weather is like and what the rains are like, regardless of where you're going, wherever you're going. Now, for Botswana, which is the country we chose to go through for our safari, and I'll talk more about Botswana and the details of it in a bit, but the best time for Botswana, both for driving safaris as well as for exploring the Delta, the Okavango Delta, is during the dry season as well, because the dry season is when the animals are looking for water, and the wildlife will congregate around the water sources, and that's where you have such opportunity to see them. Now, as for making arrangements for your visit, there are many ways to go about it. You can go on your own. You can go on a group tour, like with World Vegan Travel, and hopefully on ones that I host. But if not, just go with World Vegan Travel. If you're looking for any group to go with, I can tell you that there is no vegan group. Well, there's no vegan outfit that does what World Vegan Travel does. Everybody has a different mission. World Vegan Travel is luxury and high end, and there's a reason for it, and you get a lot of bang for your buck. One comment we've heard from a number of travelers is that we're not charging enough for the trips, and these are high-end trips. So you get so much bang for your buck, even though, they're not cheap trips, but World Vegan Travel is they're just the best. And, there's other travel companies and they're less expensive and you get less. That's just the way it is. But there is no vegan group company that goes to Africa. So World Vegan Travel is the group you want to go with, and they have been going back to Botswana, especially again and again. And I will talk more about that. But if you're interested in any kind, and actually they're doing their first to Kilimanjaro as well. So lots of exciting things happen. Make sure you reach out to World Vegan Travel, get on their mailing list, and just get on the wait list for any of the trips you see on their website. Now you can also just find a local guide. And for us, for the first time we went for our Botswana safari, you kind of find a company that will help you find the camps and make all of the arrangements for you. And we did that for Botswana. If you're interested in the name of the place, I can give it to you. I think I talk about it maybe when I get to Botswana in a few minutes, but we decided to stay in a couple different camps, which is something you're going to want to consider when you're doing a safari, because you get to see different aspects of the bush that you're in. And so just again, know what you're looking for. Do you want to do walking safaris? Do you want to do land safaris? Do you want to do water safaris? Do you want to do boat safaris? Do you want to do canoe safaris? I mean, there's so many different ways to go about seeing the wildlife in different countries that have savanna, and it's a matter of knowing what to find. So finding the group on the ground is what you're going to want to do, and reach out to them and ask questions. Now, South Africa and Zimbabwe, the other two countries we went to on that first trip, we took care of most of that ourselves. I mean, not completely, but mostly. So we did book our flights to get down to the southern part of Africa. And we also made arrangements for our hotels in Zimbabwe and an Airbnb in Cape Town. But when we were in Cape Town, I am remembering now, I had a friend who went to Cape Town many, many years ago, and it was a couple, and they had hired a driver to just be with them for the entire time and take them to the wineries and stuff. It just makes it so much easier. We rent cars where in many countries we go to, but we just didn't want to deal with it in South Africa. And so we did hire someone, and she was with us for a couple days and just kind of drove us around to the wineries and picked us up and dropped us off at our Airbnb. So that is something to consider as well. I can find her name if that's someone you wanted, contact, but there are people who do that. And actually we've gotten a lot more contacts now since then. Now that I'm thinking, we have lots of amazing vegan contacts on the ground. So I can help you with that as well, or World Vegan Travel can. So we booked most of that ourselves. But when we were in Rwanda, we did reach out to a company called Amahoro Tours, and we now use Amahoro Tours for all of our group trips. So if you don't go on a joyful vegan trip to Rwanda, or a World Vegan Travel trip to Rwanda, I recommend Amahoro Tours. We now consider them family. Our driver in 2016, his name was Safari, I know, but his name was Safari. His parents obviously saw a future for him, and he's now a friend. And the memories of that trip in 2016 are all the more special because of his being with us the whole time. He was our driver, he was our companion, he was our support. And he doesn't work for Amahoro anymore. He works for a different company that does smaller tours, but we are connected on WhatsApp, and we see him every time we go back to Rwanda. Just really special. He's just a really good friend, and we can't wait to see him because we'll be back in November. So, what are some of the questions people have when we're traveling to Africa in general, or Rwanda in particular? The questions usually have to do with safety, food, and weather, also vaccines, water, and logistics like transportation and accommodation. So I'll go over these very briefly. Safety. Rwanda, first of all, is a very safe country. There's virtually no crime directed at tourists. Of course, as a tourist, it's a good idea to use common sense, not flash your wallet in public when you're in a city or at a market. Just the same caution, common sense precaution you would use back home or anywhere. In general, though, it is a very safe country. As a woman, I feel very safe walking around the city by myself or the countryside by myself with no concerns. I'm not by myself very often, but I will walk around the city in Kigali when we go. I can't say the same thing about Cape Town. I don't feel safe in Cape Town at all. And there's a reason for that. I'll get into that when we talk about Southern Africa, but you got to watch yourself when you're in Cape Town. Botswana is a different story because you're really not in the city at all. You don't go to Mon, which is the capital. You go into the airport and then you take a little baby plane to your camps, but you're in the camps the whole time, so you're with the people. So safety really isn't even an issue. It's more around animals, making sure you're doing the right things when you're on safari, because of course, if you do the wrong thing, there are consequences to that. So safety in that case, I would say, for Botswana is more to do with the animals. And then Zimbabwe, no, didn't feel safe in Zimbabwe either. Wasn't a huge fan of Zimbabwe, and I'll get into that in a bit. Weather is a huge, huge reason for me that I either love a place or hate it. And hate is a strong word, but dislike it. So for me, one of the things I love about Rwanda is that it is tropical, but because it's so high, it's 5,000 feet above sea level, it's temperate. And so it's just a really temperate, like the weather is just lovely. It's warm, but no warmer than a hot day in California. I don't know. Maybe I'm misremembering, but my memory and we were just there last year, is that, yeah, the weather is just so much more enjoyable. It's just a really pleasant, temperate climate. And so, 75, maybe 80, that's like kind of the high, but usually 75, 70. I mean, it's just really, really lovely. Can't say the same thing about Southern Africa. I'm not a fan of the weather in Southern Africa. That's below the equator, obviously. I mean, Rwanda's just below the equator too, but it's again, because the elevation is so high, the weather is much more temperate. I am not a fan of humidity. Many people are. I am not. So I just don't love the thick, wet, humid temperature in the south. That's Botswana, that's South Africa, um, Zimbabwe a bit as well. We were there for just a short time, and there's a lot of humidity, especially because we were near Victoria Falls. So there's a lot of humidity there. But I love the weather in Rwanda specifically. For water, people ask me a lot about water, if it's potable. No, most developing countries in Africa don't have access to clean water like we do. And it's one of those things when you become very aware of how grateful you should be every moment. You can just turn on your tap and drink water. It's not potable in Rwanda. I mean, it is, if you're able to withstand all of the little microbes that are going to get you sick, but it's not potable. You would get very sick. So for this reason, bottled water is recommended all the time. And of course, for us on the trips, I hate to use all the individual water bottles, the plastic water bottles. And so we provide kind of the big several gallon water containers in all of our vehicles and our hotels so that you can easily fill up your own reusable bottles with filtered water. However, definitely use bottled water when you're on your own, and even brushing your teeth and avoiding ice cubes in drinks unless you're certain they are made from purified water. And that kind of goes for all over the place. Trying to remember South Africa. Yeah, I think in South Africa, maybe it's potable, but there are so many other reasons. I don't know. South Africa. Um, but anyway, you'll check before you go. So for vaccines in Rwanda, there's no mandatory vaccinations required to enter Rwanda, except for yellow fever if you are coming from a country that has high yellow fever infections. So we're coming from the United States, but if you're in another country before you go to Rwanda where there's a high risk of yellow fever, I think it's something like I don't know, couple weeks or something, you have to find out, then you need to have a certificate, a yellow fever certificate, to submit if you're over a year. Right. If actually, you're right. If you've been in transit through an infected yellow fever area for more than 12 hours, I said a couple days, it's 12 hours, but that's only for, a country that's already in a highly infected area. So I'm remembering that we did do a yellow fever vaccination the first time we went in 2016. And I wonder if it wasn't because we were going through another country. I can't remember, but we don't do it now. We don't, especially for November, we're going straight to Rwanda from the United States through Amsterdam. And neither of those places are yellow fever countries, yellow fever risk countries. So, but check before you go. And I think it's the case for Botswana as well. You're going to have to check the vaccinations for other places. But the routine vaccinations, it's still recommended that you get things like hepatitis A, hepatitis B, typhoid, and we do that. We do make sure that we're up to date on all of those vaccinations, many of which last for 15 years, 20 years. Sometimes you require a booster. So we do make sure of that. And that's just, it's just good best practices to avoid these diseases that I do not want. And rabies is often recommended also, but we do not get rabies. The main reason is because it's very expensive to get the vaccination, and most medical insurance does not pay for it. So the best way to avoid rabies in a country or in a place where there may be rabies and the animals may not be inoculated against it is to not interact with unfamiliar animals or animals are not inoculated. So not an issue, but it is something we have to remember because for all of us, especially for those of us who are animal people, most vegans are when we're going on these trips, you kind of have to remember like, oh, I want to touch that animal, but I'm not going to. Now, I don't really see a lot of stray animals in Rwanda, even in Kigali. It's just not a thing. So it's not an issue. It's not like I see dogs and I want to pet them, but I have to withhold my desire because I don't want to put myself in a situation where I would be bitten. But it's something to remember. You can get a rabies vaccination. It's just very expensive, and I don't think most medical insurance pay for it. Now, malaria is something that is endemic in Rwanda and Botswana, but everyone makes their own decision about whether you want to take the antimalarials. The only reason it's kind of a pain to take them is because you have to take them like a week before you leave and continue a week after you come home. So it's just one of these things like, just remembering every single day, even after you get home. It's annoying, but personally, I take the antimalarials and so does David. I don't think Bridie and Seb do, but everyone has their own, kind of, you'll just make your own decision. And the common antimalarials would be Malarone or doxycycline, but you'll talk to your doctor or your travel company. There's lots of travel companies, travel clinics that help you with these things. And so first I would start with your medical professional and talk to them about where you're going and they can look it up for you. You can also do the work yourself, but a clinic like a Passport Health Travel Clinic is really helpful because they will easily find out what vaccines you need for the places you're going. They offer advice, but they can also administer vaccines. So that's called, if you just type in Passport Travel Clinic, Passport Health Travel Clinic, that will be helpful. Passports, for most places, need to be valid 6 months after the date of entry. So, for instance, I'm arriving in Rwanda this year on November 22nd, and my current passport expires 6 months later on May 26th. So I'm cutting it really close, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to renew my passport prior to, well, long before. I'm going to start now. So I have my new passport that's well within the 6 month time period. So just note that if you're planning any trip, make sure you check your passport when it's expiring. What are they good for? 10 years. Mine just happens to be, expiring next year, and I want to make sure I'm not going to have an issue when I'm in Rwanda. Because like, what if we had to stay for a few more days, and or something happened, or we decided to change our minds and we wanted to stay longer? Like, I wouldn't have the option to do that with my passport being that close to the expiration. Transportation, there are a lot of ways to get around. Like I said, whether you're in South Africa, whether you're in Rwanda, taxis and Ubers are in a lot of these countries, and you can find your own private car. I mentioned that Amahoro Tours, that's who transports us all around in Land Rovers, mostly, even when we're in Kigali. Well, when we're in Kigali, we're walking, we're not. Well, actually, that's not true. When we're in Kigali, we do take some of our vehicles because we're going a little outside of Kigali for some of the genocide memorials. But and the Land Rovers make sense because then when we go into the national parks, you need a Land Rover to deal with the terrain. You need more rugged vehicles. So that's the case. But, there are, minivans, there are cabs, there are sedans. You can get whatever when you're traveling around these places. And then getting there, when you're going to Rwanda, there are 3 airlines that go to Rwanda. One is KLM, and they go through Amsterdam. One is Qatar, or Qatar, however you say it, that goes through Doha. And one is Turkish that goes through Istanbul. We have flown mostly Qatar, through Doha because the business class seats on Qatar are called Q suites. They are off the hook amazing. The joke with us now is that my husband, he's actually more interested in getting in the Q suites on the plane rather than even getting to Rwanda. He just loves the Q suites. They're kind of amazing. But this time, and we have done Turkish as well, but this time we're actually doing KLM for the first time. And I say business class like it sounds fancy schmancy, and it is, but we don't pay for business class. This is all through travel hacking, which I've talked about before. And David did a podcast with Bridie on her podcast at World Vegan Travel. So if you are interested in travel hacking, go check that out. It's a matter of just getting the points you need through credit cards and that kind of thing so that you can use those points for business travel. And when you're traveling internationally as much as we are, it does really make a difference because it's exhausting to travel. It just is. Now, food obviously is the big question. And I want to talk a little bit about food in, I'm going to say Africa, but that is so not accurate to even talk about that. I mean, you can't even talk about food in Italy. Italian food isn't even a thing because the regions are so specific to the ingredients they use. And so it's obviously the case in different countries in Africa as well. In Rwanda, on our trips, of course, we're ensuring that our travelers are spoiled with the most incredible cuisine. But the truth is, Rwanda is not known for its cuisine like Ethiopia is, for instance. But it is a very vegan friendly country. And I often quip that everyone says they don't eat a lot of meat, dairy, and eggs. You know how you say to someone, I'm vegan. They go, I'm not, but I don't eat a lot of meat. Everyone says that. And yet you don't really know how much you eat until you stop eating meat, dairy, and eggs. And most people are eating a lot. But in Rwanda, they actually really don't eat a lot of meat. So they can legitimately say they don't. They eat meat maybe a few times a month. And when they do, it's still a small amount. So their typical diet consists of sweet potatoes, beans, corn, peas, millet, fruit. And then especially in the cities, international cuisine abounds. You'll especially find Indian, Middle Eastern, Southeast Asian. You'll find pizza and pasta, even in some smaller towns as well. And you're going to have the same issue like with anywhere. Any of these restaurants, you're still going to want to say, don't put cheese on my pizza. Is there ghee in my dal? When you're in an Indian restaurant. Now, there are going to be some fancier restaurants, especially French restaurants in some of the bigger cities, and that includes in Zimbabwe, in Rwanda, really everywhere you're going to find other restaurants and other cuisines that are not vegan friendly. So I wouldn't go to a French restaurant in France. I mean, I wouldn't go to you're not going to find a lot in a traditional French restaurant anywhere you go. And that would be the case in Rwanda as well. So, like I said, Rwandan cuisine is not known the world over like Ethiopian cuisine is. And I'm trying to equate another African country whose cuisine really did make its way around the world. And Ethiopian, I think, is one of them. Nigerian, a little bit now these days, but I can't think of another country. Maybe Ghana. I see some like I'm seeing more kind of West African cuisine kind of making its way more in, well, and especially in the United States, where unfortunately so many people were taken from West Africa. So you do have kind of more of that cuisine that's, kind of now a bit more hybrid because of slavery. That's a whole different podcast. But but Rwanda is one of those countries where the cuisine is not known the world over. However, there are some really, really exciting culinary things happening in Rwanda, and with some chefs focusing on Rwandan ingredients and trying to get Rwandan cuisine on the map. And one of those restaurants is one that we go to on our own. I don't think it's part of our group trip. So for anyone listening who is going with us to Rwanda, you'll have to remind me. I can't remember, or I'll have to remind you, or whatever. Well, you'll know. But it's called Metza Malonga, and it's so good. And there's lots of restaurants, and of course, we give these restaurants to all of our travelers who are there a couple days beforehand or are staying a couple days afterwards. When they're not on our group trip, we let people know of some other restaurants they can go to. And I do have some favorites in Kigali. I do definitely have some favorites, but then we go to some really awesome ones as well when we're there. So as far as where to stay, again, when you're in the capital of any of these countries, of course, you're going to find a lot of chain hotels. You're going to find familiar ones. When we're in Kigali, we stay in the Marriott, which is a really lovely Marriott. There's a Sheraton in town. I mean, so you're going to find a lot of familiar chains. When we first went in 2016, we did stay at the Hotel Mille Collines, which was the inspiration for the film Hotel Rwanda. Of course, if you haven't seen it, you can see it. It takes place during the Rwandan genocide of 1994. I'd recommend reading history books rather than that movie if you want. But it kind of gives you a sense of things, but it's still a Hollywood movie. So I would really recommend other movies and documentaries, and I can give you that. I actually have an entire list of movies and books about Rwanda if you're interested, and I do give this to my travelers who are coming with us as well. But the hotel itself is very famous for having been a place of refuge for some of the Tutsis who were being attacked by the Hutus. And of course, during this genocide, almost 1 million people were killed. by the Hutu majority government within 100 days, which was pretty tragic. So it was between April 7th and mid-July of 1994. And so there's lots to learn about that and know about that. And it's an intricate and fascinating and very tragic history. Now, the hotel itself, the views are amazing and the outdoor public spaces are amazing. And so I really recommend going there for a drink if you are just going to Rwanda or going to Kigali. But the rooms were dated and I know they were doing a renovation. I don't know if it's done yet, so find out. But definitely go there to just have a drink in the back, and then it's just a really lovely place. We stayed at the Marriott, as I said, which is lovely. Also, just great rooms, familiar rooms. We always joke that it has the best Wi-Fi anywhere, and a really wonderful back patio with just lots of outdoor seating. And there's actually a really good Italian restaurant in the hotel. We usually go there for pizza the last night. And so it's really a matter of what you want when you're traveling and what your budget is. Wherever you are going, definitely a tip from the hip is go on a guided tour of any city you go to, even your own city. I think it's a wonderful way to get context for the place that you're visiting. It's a way to orient yourself. It's just a really great way to, like, very quickly kind of get a sense of where you are. So I recommend doing a guided tour. We don't do that as far as our group trip, but if you're arriving beforehand or any city you're going to, do a guided tour. We do the genocide memorials. There's the Kigali Genocide Memorial, and we go to other memorials. You may have heard of some of the very well-known churches that where a lot of Tutsi refugees were killed. There was a time when churches were a place of refuge for people who were trying to escape, a massacre or persecution. And in this case, it was not the case. There hundreds and scores of people were killed in these churches, including children and women, and it's incredibly, incredibly disturbing. But it is so important to go to these places and see um, the remains and exhibits and be there and remember. That's what memorials are, quite literally, is to remember. And Rwanda takes the genocide very seriously, and they want people to go to the memorial so that this will never happen again. And so that's where we go when we're in Rwanda. And there's lots of other places I could recommend, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds. And so same thing with anywhere you're going, like just find out beforehand where are the places to go to respect and honor the country and the history and understand it more. And certainly in terms of the language in Rwanda, the official language, I think there's four official languages. There's English, French, because the Belgians were there for so long, so that's why there's French spoken. Kinyarwanda is the native language of Rwanda, and then Swahili, because it's on the eastern part of Africa, so it borders Tanzania, and Kenya's right there. So Swahili is also spoken, but very small percentage. You're mostly going to hear English and French, and in the villages, you're going to hear Kinyarwanda. My point is, if you can learn just a few words in any language of any country you're going to, it's, I think, a courtesy. I obviously try to do it when I'm in Italy because I'm learning Italian, but when we were in Croatia, I try, very little. I mean, I did not speak it. English is mostly spoken in Croatia. But I learned how to say thank you. I learned how to say please. We learned how to say, a few things. So I feel like it's a courtesy. And Kinyarwanda is a difficult language. There's a lot of syllables, but I really love it as a language. It reminds me of Italian in the way that it's very phonetic, and there's a lot of consonants. I love consonants. It's one of the reasons I'm not a fan of French because there's a lot of vowels in that language. Okay, moving on. So, in terms of national parks, when you're going to any of these countries, you will need to get permits. Now, when we're going to see the mountain gorillas, you may have heard me talk about this before, the mountain range in the northwest part of Rwanda and the southwest part of Uganda and the eastern part of the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. That's the only place in the world where mountain gorillas live and thrive, as well as the golden monkeys as well. And we see them too. So that's the case whether you're going to a savanna and you're going on a safari, in the case you're going to a primate safari, you need to get a permit beforehand. Now, with the permits for the gorillas, you really need to get them in advance, especially in Rwanda, because it's one of the most popular places people go to see the mountain gorillas. You can go to the other places. I wouldn't go to Congo. It's just a mess. It's been a mess for a very long time, and I don't have a lot of I don't want to say I don't have a lot of hope. I just don't see it correcting itself anytime soon. But Uganda would be the second place I would recommend. It's less expensive for the permit in Rwanda. As of this date, the permit in Rwanda is $1,500. In Uganda, it might be half that. But just check to see and check the safety of the country. Uganda is also more difficult to see the gorillas because it's quite literally in the impenetrable forest. That's the name of the forest. In Rwanda, it's called the Volcanoes National Park. So I know people who've gone to Uganda to see the mountain gorillas, so go if that's where you want to go. I'd love to go to Uganda as well, doing the trek, but I just really I know Rwanda and I know it really well, and I know the safety that's put in place for the gorillas and for the people because there's so much conflict in that area, especially because of the Congo. You just really want to make sure. But I can tell you with great confidence that Rwanda, we do not feel unsafe in Rwanda at all at any time. Now, if you ever see photos of us on our gorilla tracks, you will see the trackers we're with do have guns. They do have rifles, but the rifles are not to hurt anyone. No gorilla has ever been shot by a Rwandan tracker, and it's really to just in case there's any kind of emergency, they would shoot. They would shoot in the air, and again, we don't have any concerns about being in a conflict with other with people, but it's one of the things that is the reality in a country that has had a lot of tumultuousness and especially in the surrounding areas. So when you go see the gorillas, the permits are meant to limit the number of people trekking to see the gorillas. So I have entire podcast episodes on, the ethics around ecotourism. So go listen to those if you're interested in more in this, because some people might say, nope, I don't want to go. I'm infringing on their habitat. I don't even want to do that. That's your prerogative. I can say, and I do say in that podcast episode, that it is because of this kind of trekking that there are now over 1,000 individuals in the forest in the Virunga Mountains, whereas when Diane Fossey was murdered in 1985, 84, 85, there were 250. So it is because of this ecotourism and the permits that people are paying for that this conservation story is a successful one. It's an incredible success, and it's getting better. So much so that the government is actually buying land from the farms that obviously impeded upon the bamboo forest in the first place. That's why the gorillas, it's one of the reasons the gorillas are in such low numbers, because of the habitat loss. But the government of Rwanda is buying up land to expand the bamboo forest. So it's such a success story, which is really exciting. The other thing that's really important wherever you go and wherever you go on a safari, whether it's a savanna safari, the Big Five, or primate safaris, is to know where your money is going. So one of the things that makes a successful visit to any of these places, when we're talking about the national parks and we're talking about the wildlife, is making sure that local communities are also supported. And that was a huge mistake for so many decades when people were visiting, is the local communities weren't benefiting. And in fact, the local communities in many cases are actually in conflict with the animals, because most of the people surrounding the national forests and the national parks are farmers. And so when the animals would come, whether it's the chimpanzees, whether it's the mountain gorillas, whether it's elephants, whatever the animals are who live in the surrounding areas, or I should say the farms that now live around, who came into the forest, however, this is the reality, they would come if they're hungry and look for food, and they would eat the farm produce, and it would cause conflict with the communities. So one of the things that the permits pay for, 20% of the revenue collections from gorilla permits, for instance, are given to the communities in the form of supporting their income generating projects, improving social services like schools and health centers, among other things. So you really want to make sure that you are supporting the local communities with the money you're given. And so that's just a matter of making sure that you're going through a reputable outfit and going to a reputable place. So when you're going to see the gorillas, you'll probably remember this. You're only with the gorilla family that you're assigned to for an hour. You're not there for any longer than that. It's an incredible experience. It's just breathtaking every time we do it because obviously there's different individuals, even though we've seen the same family a couple times. I mean, it's grown, they're new individuals, there's new babies, they're in a different part because they're just moving all the time. So it's a different experience every time and it's quite breathtaking. So you'll want to reach out to whoever you were working with on the ground in any of these countries that I'm talking about and get your permits in advance and ask questions about what the conservation is like. It's really exciting because Rwanda, I'll speak about Rwanda because I can. Rwanda is such a small country. It's such a tiny country, and yet it has so much diversity. You have up in the north, you have the Volcanoes National Park, which is where the mountain gorillas are. So it's bamboo forest. Down in the south, you have a rainforest, which is where the chimpanzees are. And I'm only naming the big primates. There's obviously lots of other smaller primates and lots of other animals. But in the south, you have the rainforest. In the north, you have the bamboo forest. So very different terrain. In the east, you have a savanna. You have Akagera National Park. So in the south, it's Nyungwe. In the north, it's volcanoes. In the east, it's Akagera, and it borders Tanzania. So what is amazing is is like for such a small country, you can actually get a primate safari and a savanna safari, like seeing the big five. I'm using that in quotes because that was, came out of kind of the hunting rhetoric, but it is what we still talk about. Like you want to see the rhinos, you want to see the elephants, you want to see the hippos, you want to see the leopards. So, well, the leopards aren't a big five. What's the other two? What's the other two? Wildebeest? No. Buffalo. So the point is, in Rwanda, you don't even have to go to any other country. You can go on a safari. You can go on a safari drive in Akagera, and we've done that. You can see the chimpanzees in the south and the mountain gorillas in the north. So it's quite remarkable. And then you have this lake called Lake Kivu that runs almost the length of the entire country, which is gorgeous. And we also get on that lake and on a boat, and it's really lovely. We eat lunch on the lake. It's just gorgeous. So it's just a gorgeous country. But this would be the case anywhere, is you have just like a variety of parks, and so you're going to want to know what you want to see, who you want to see, and plan accordingly. I I think I talked about this in the ecotourism episode, but African Parks is an incredible organization. I want you to go look them up and just go see the work that they're doing. So they're an example of why I can say confidently that the places we go to are supporting local communities. And I can talk about the success story. I could just rave about the success story of Akagera, and I would really recommend you go and look it up because Akagera was a national park that was a huge park. It was where a lot of people did go on safari for many, many decades, certainly during the colonial period in Rwanda, especially. And then after the 1994 genocide, the park faced severe challenges, including poaching and habitat destruction, because all of the refugees were moving into Akagera and just making it smaller and smaller and smaller and basically poaching all of the animals. And so in 2010, a partnership with African Parks initiated its transformation, and we have seen the transformation. So they started doing like incredible anti-poaching measures. One of the most remarkable things when we were there was seeing an entire, oh my God, how large was that? I can't even tell you. It was massive. Just this huge area where they have all of the snares, all of the poaching snares and traps that they confiscated and put in this one spot so that visitors who do this behind the scenes tour can go see. And you just see like, oh my God, like, I mean, how any animal even survived a day, I don't even know, because there were just traps and snares everywhere. So they reduced poaching, they increased community engagement, they increased community support. I mean, it's just incredible. And so we were there in 2019 and a behind the scenes tour. So just hear that. In 2010 is when they started this partnership. In 2019, it was a flourishing park again, and they had just brought in black rhinos, there are lions, there's the big five. And so many of our travelers who are coming with us in November, for instance, and who did this in the past as well, they go on a safari to Akagera a couple days before they start our group trip. They either do it before or after. And so that is an option. So if you're going to Rwanda, I definitely recommend, you're going to be there I recommend going to all of the national parks. I mean, I think there's a fourth one they're working on right now, but the three big ones are volcanoes, Nyungwe and Akagera. And Nyungwe is amazing. It's just incredible. It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It's like heaven. And it's in the place we stay, it's surrounding a, there's a rainforest surrounding it, and it's actually on a tea plantation. There's just a diverse amount of wildlife. You can go bird watching because there's just little primates all over the place. Um, it's just an incredible space, and there's been a lot of conservation initiatives there too. It was getting overrun with, I think it was tobacco plantations, if I'm remembering correctly. And so then there's been this initiative to actually bring back the forests and protect the forests. And so lots of really encouraging things happening in Rwanda as far as conservation. I'm really encouraged by that. It's not a perfect place. There is no perfect place, but they're doing a lot. They're doing a lot. It's one of the reasons we keep going back to support it. We do stay in some fancy schmancy places. We decided to do that in 2016. So we stayed down in Nyungwe. It's called Nyungwe House or something. And now it's owned by One and Only, which is a luxury property chain, and they also built the other One and Only property we go to in Rwanda, and that is a Gorilla's Nest that's up in the north. So the first time we went, we did not stay there because it wasn't built. The second time we went with our travelers, we didn't stay there because it wasn't built. And then by the time we went in 2022, Gorilla's Nest had been built, and it's just incredible. So we do go there, but depending on what your budget is, there's lots of places. There's lots of places to stay. There's a variety, but I would recommend it if you can budget a little bit to stay in at least Nyungwe down in the south. It's just really special. So I think it speaks volumes that we're returning to Rwanda for the fifth time. It continues to enchant every time I go. I cannot say the same for another part of Africa I've been to a few times and don't really need to go back to if I can help it. It just goes to show I think we all have different places we're drawn to. So let's talk a bit more about Botswana and a safari, because I want to just talk about that briefly because, safaris are kind of the main reason people go to Africa. And I will say that, when I'm talking about Rwanda, they are safaris. They're just primate safaris, not kind of savanna safaris like Big Five. But when most people go to Africa, they're either going to Tanzania or Kenya. They might go to Botswana, South Africa, and those are kind of the big places for the savannas in Eastern and Southern Africa to see the Big Five. Now, Southern Africa, South Africa especially, you know, a lot of people go there. Kruger is very popular, but you really want to check all of these places about how crowded they can get. You might hear or you might go research the criticism a lot of the national parks get because they allow so many vehicles to crowd around the animals. And I know that means it's more affordable to do these safaris, but I have a really hard time with that. You know, I realize that, what I'm doing, I'm also there too. But the reason we choose to go where we go is because I don't want to be with 10 other vehicles surrounding a lion, who's sleeping. I just feel like it's really invasive. And so some parks do this better than others. And Kruger has been criticized. So has different places in Kenya and in Tanzania. So you're going to get different things because, in Tanzania, you get the Great Migration, you get the, Serengeti, you get in Kenya, you get the, Maasai communities. So look yourself, do your due diligence to find out when is the best time to go, but also what kind of experience you get on the different, concessions. There could be private concessions, there might be private conservancies. So you really want to be careful and do your due diligence. The reason we chose Botswana and continue to choose Botswana is because it's kind of known for the high cost, low volume. So that means it costs more to go, but there are fewer people. So it is more expensive, but you do get this really high-end experience, but low impact tourism. So you don't get 10 vehicles, 20 vehicles surrounding an animal. Two, and even when we go, like in 2022, when we did it, again, we're with several people. So we have, there's several vehicles, but everybody kind of goes out in a different place. So the most number of vehicles that would ever be around an animal would be 2, 3. Maybe there was one time when we were all, it was kind of amazing. There was a pangolin. So there was a bit of fervor, and some of us felt uncomfortable by that actually, because about four vehicles were kind of like looking to see this pangolin. And so, but that was the most that most number of vehicles I've ever seen at a time, and that was an exception. So that's why we choose Botswana for its conservation commitment, and those are the kinds of questions you want to ask. So you want to see as many animals as possible, but you want to do so in the most ethical manner as possible. For me, also, I mean, most of the places you're going to stay, these are going to be really comfortable lodgings. They're called camps, but they're like luxury camps with like running water, and there's, flushing toilets and fans, and that's what I want. Like, I'm outside all day, every day. I'm hiking, I'm working outside. I want to be outside every single second, but I want a flushing toilet. I want running water. That's just me. So you're going to find that in most of these places, and the prices are going to vary depending. So, just look into that. And I can tell you that like a lot of these camps will accommodate you as a vegan, but you are not going to have the kind of food you have on something like a World Vegan Travel trip. You're just not. You're just not. So, we had a couple who was with us in just recently in northern Italy, and they were telling us the same thing. And they went on a very high end safari with Abercrombie and Kent, very high end, and the food was mediocre at best. So look, you're not going to Botswana for the food. I mean, even the food when you're there, like it's still like pretty basic food. I mean, they always tell us that we're eating the food of their people because we're not eating all of the meat. Now, Botswana is a meat-heavy country, but I'm talking about people who would be eating less meat than most, and so we are eating, tubers and grains and beans and legumes and that kind of thing. But the point is, I know you're not going to Botswana for the food. You're going for the animals, and so sometimes it's a trade-off, but still, you're going to have a much better experience if you go with a vegan company. So when you are choosing the camps also, in any of these places, whether it's South Africa, whether it's Kenya, Tanzania, Botswana, you're going to want to just decide to maybe go to maybe 2 camps or maybe 3, because you're going to get a different experience based on that. When we're in Botswana, for instance, you could be in a Chobe National Park and you're going to see more hippos and elephants and crocodiles because of the floodplains and the swamps, and there's some woodlands, versus Moremi Game Preserve Reserve, where you're going to be part of the Okavango Delta. And the Delta is just an incredible diverse ecosystem. You're going to get a lot of birds, and you're going to be able to do a Makoro dugout canoe tour. You're going to be able to do some walking safaris. You're going to see all of the Big Five. It's really incredible, but you get a different experience in the different camps. So you're going to want to decide that for yourself. Some do night safaris, some do helicopter safaris. I don't want to do helicopter safaris personally, but those are the kinds of things you'll have to decide. Everything is going to be different. Nothing is better, but it's just a matter of kind of knowing what you want. So I personally loved the experiences we had in Botswana, but it's really interesting because you know me as an animal person, you know me as someone who spots wildlife like a pro. I could sit and watch the deer and the squirrels and the interactions and the relationships for hours. I don't, but I could because I have other things to do. But I love wildlife and large mammals. I love them so much. And yet it's really interesting because I've done a Botswana safari a few times now, and I just feel like I don't need to do it again anytime soon. I'm not saying I would never do it again, but it's really different than doing like a primate safari. And, I mean, I'm not saying anything that's not obvious. On a primate safari, you're trekking, you're on the ground, you're moving, you're going up the mountain, you're running around the forest looking for chimpanzees. You're running, you're not running around, but you're traipsing around, you're trekking for the mountain gorillas, you're in the forest and you're moving. And I love that. In a driven land safari, which is you have to do for safety. I mean, there are some walking safaris, but like it's only for a short time. If you really want to see the diverse amount of wildlife in any of these countries, you're going to want to be in a Land Rover. And so you're just in it for hours, and you start at like 5 in the morning. I am an early riser, but even I'm like, okay. And then you get out there and you're driving for hours and hours, and it's beautiful and it's amazing. And I am so grateful I've done it, but I don't have to do it again anytime soon. So I say that, I don't know, just because it's a perspective. And look, I am saying this from a place of privilege because of the fact that I've been able to do this several times, because I've incorporated this into my business. It's the only reason. I wouldn't have gone and done several safaris. To be honest, I wouldn't have gone and done several safaris if I hadn't incorporated this into my business and decided to host those trips. But right now, Bridie and Seb, as I said, in World Vegan Travel, they're hosting a ton to Botswana. And, they always invite me to host. I can host them if I wanted to, but I'm like, no, I'm good. But Rwanda, different story. I want to go back again and again because I love the primate. I'm also, I think that's just the difference too. I'm a forest person, and that's what you get in Rwanda and other places, is the forest versus the wide open savanna. So that's also just a matter of the kind of the landscape that I like. And I mentioned weather, but that's not the main reason. The main reason is, it's just what I've said. For South Africa, I am not a huge fan, and it's again personal preference, but I think a lot of, especially Europeans and Americans, North Americans, go to South Africa. I think it is beautiful. The landscape is gorgeous. Go yourself to see Table Mountain in Cape Town. It's incredible. It's very similar to me to California, to San Francisco specifically, because it's on a cape and it is, there's the water right there. There's actually, very interestingly, there's also a prison, which is where Mandela was, and we have Alcatraz in the Bay in, San Francisco. So there's a very similar landscape to me. The weather is very different. I'm not a fan of the weather, but there are other reasons that I don't like South Africa. There's lingering effects of apartheid and economic apartheid. It's a significant issue. There's a huge contrast between the wealthy, predominantly white areas and the impoverished Black communities. You can see it when you just drive a tiny bit out of Cape Town. Corruption in government is rampant. It's so rampant that there are daily power outages every day. Every day. So imagine running a business in a place where the government cannot get their stuff together, so much so that every day there's rolling blackouts. So we were there and it was like, oh, we're in zone 5. So, okay, we're in zone 5. So between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m., there's not going to be any electricity. So I'm like, oh my God, okay, when am I going to do my hair? Like, I mean, the point is like, you never have to think about that in any place. So it's just difficult. You see the shanty towns just immediately outside of Cape Town, the barbed wire at wineries, right? It's just pervasive, and it's just uncomfortable. And as I said, I don't feel safe. One of our travelers actually had his wallet, no, not his wallet, his phone picked from his pocket, just walking around a beautiful area of Cape Town, a beautiful area. There's so much poverty that people have turned to crime, and it just makes me feel unsettled. And so that has impacted my overall perception and enjoyment of South Africa, but do go. Many people love it, and it's worth going for the first time. But I would say if there is a first country to go to and you want the experience of, just again, this cultural tradition among Black Africans. I mean, obviously, white Africans are legitimate in South Africa. I wouldn't say that they're not. They've been there for 400 years. However, it's a very different experience in South Africa than going to a place that's predominantly Black, even though they'd been colonized, and Rwanda had been for many years by the Belgians. So, and fact, by the way, if you're interested in African history, there's only one country. It's only one country that wasn't colonized in Africa of the 54. Do you know which one it is? Should I tell you? I'm going to ask you to ask me, and I'll know if you're paying attention. I'll know who's paying attention to this podcast. Ask me, or you can do the research yourself. But, all right, I'll give you a moment. One country, the only country that was not colonized in Africa was Ethiopia. It was attempted to be colonized by the Italians, but the Ethiopians fended them off. And so that's the only country that did not have a colonial power. It's very interesting. So finally, Zimbabwe was also a place I didn't really love. There's a lot of machismo. There's a lot of masculinity there. There's a lot of like hunting mentality. There's a lot of dead animals featured at hotels and lodges and restaurants everywhere. There's also an overall feeling of economic depression and social depression and poverty. You could feel it. Like, I just did not feel safe walking around. We were only there for a short time, but you could feel it. I mean, we were there because of Victoria Falls, and because you can't go straight from Rwanda to Botswana, and that's what our journey was at the time, and even it has been since. You can't just go straight. You have to cut through somewhere else. And so that first time we were like, okay, there's Victoria Falls. Let's go to Victoria Falls. So we decided to go to Zimbabwe for that reason. And we did have a fun experience in Zimbabwe in the sense that there was a hotel that had a restaurant that we were shocked had a vegan menu. And it had all of the fry vegan meats also. So we had like a really amazing experience in that way. So there was a positive thing there, but I didn't love Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has suffered so much because of the long rule of Robert Mugabe as an example of one of those people who just stepped up, took power, and just mismanaged the country, was corrupt, authoritarian rule, crippled the economy, eroded public trust. Then finally, they had all the land seizures from white farmers in the early 2000s. It led to a collapse in agricultural production. It exacerbated food shortages. I mean, it's just been a mess for so long because Mugabe ruled for 37 years. 37 years. He became prime minister in 1980 and then became president in 1987, and he was forced to resign in 2017. So he ruled Zimbabwe as if it were his own personal fiefdom, and he just amassed wealth, and the majority of the population faced poverty and unemployment. So it's you feel it still, and it's still really trying desperately to come back. But his authoritarian rule suppressed um, opposition and consolidated power, and so this country is still feeling the effects of it. So, and Victoria Falls, again, I sound critical. I don't mean to, but Victoria Falls they were okay. I don't know if it's because we live, in a state where there's just a lot of big majesty. Like there's a lot of big national parks with a lot of big, landscapes and big mountains and big oceans and, big waterfalls. I don't know if that's why, but I saw Victoria Falls and I was like, they're lovely. But and so go. But I was underwhelmed. I'm allowed to be. There's just certain places that speak to you and certain places that don't. So overall, I would love to hear from you where you're planning on going. Africa is not inexpensive. You'd think it would be because you're in these places that, that there's a lot of poverty, but you are paying to go to Africa. Obviously, it costs money to get there, but start your travel hacking now so you can go using your points. But, I do think there are a lot of places in Africa where it really does show how your tourism dollars support their survival of animals, their habitats, and of course the neighboring communities. And I think it's really important. I think there's a lot to be said for, the funds from tourism going to the right places versus a lot of missionary work. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of, good intentioned, well-intentioned, Christian missionaries and just other places where you're going and, trying to infuse cash into these impoverished areas. But if it's not done well, if it's not done thoughtfully, it's not going to change the infrastructure at all. And so I really do appreciate what I've seen in terms of at least the places we've gone to and how the tourism dollars has really supported the animals in the communities. So I've said this before, visiting these places is a privilege. It's not a right. If visiting the gorillas in Rwanda or name an animal in their habitat anywhere, not just in Africa, meant that it caused the animals harm, I wouldn't go. I'd be happy to sacrifice me not going to see them for their own survival and future. But I do believe that it's going to be impossible to stop humans from wanting to experience seeing animals in person. And I'd rather it be done in an ethical way that protects their habitats. And there's ways to do that, and there's ways to not. So check out some of the other podcast episodes I've done on this topic if you're interested. Overall, I would say the last bits of advice I would give you wherever you're going. Number one, get canceled for any reason travel insurance. World Vegan Travel, Bridie definitely has a podcast for more on that. Bridie has taught me a lot about travel insurance because it's very complicated, but cancel for any reason travel insurance. It might cost you a few extra $100, but it's going to be worth it in the end if you do have to cancel for any reason, right? Because there's a lot of fine print in the other kinds of travel insurance, but cancel for any reason seems to be pretty comprehensive. Number two, book your flights and hotels with a credit card that has travel protection for flights that change, flights that are canceled, luggage that gets lost. So make sure your credit card, and there's a lot of really good travel credit cards, especially American Express Platinum. I think also the Chase Sapphire Preferred and the Chase Sapphire Reserved, but check your credit card to make sure that there's some kind of protection if your luggage is lost, etc. Number three, I would say if you're traveling at all, it's worth it to get TSA Pre. It's a program that's offered by the TSA. It's fantastic. It's like $80 for 3 years. You can walk right through the TSA Pre security line. You're not delayed. You don't have to take off your shoes. You don't have to wait in line. Clear is another one that is also pretty inexpensive, but worth it. So we do Clear and TSA. And then finally, the global entry. So a lot of these programs now, and some credit cards have credit for these programs, and you can get all of them at once. So TSA Pre and Global Entry, you might find in, like, I think the the American Express Platinum, I think has you get reimbursed for the fees for the TSA Pre and the Global Entry. Like, they're coupled now; they're not separate. But the TSA Pre is for when you're in the United States. It's it's a transportation security association, whatever it is, the government. So it's the USA. But even if you're going even if you're going to another country, when you're in the USA, you can still get on the TSA pre-line, right? But when you're coming back into the United States and you're going through Customs and Border Protection, the global entry program allows you to have clearance beforehand, and you just walk through. So it is amazing when you're coming home, especially if you've been on, far away and you've been traveling for days. It's exhausting. All you want to do when you get home is just get through security as quickly as possible, through customs as quickly as possible, get your luggage if you're trekking bags, and get out of there. So I can tell you that when you do the global entry, you are not waiting in that long line that starts to wrap around all those little pylons. Just get global entry. It's absolutely worth it. I mentioned the passport, making sure it doesn't expire within 6 months of travel. And listen to my episode if you want on traveling without checking bags. I finally decided to get a new suitcase because I've been using the kind that's just 2 wheels and I'm sick of it. I'm going to get the one that is 4 wheels, but I'm still going to get the carry-on. And I just did it when we were in Italy and Croatia. And once again, I overpacked. Even just doing a carry-on, I still overpacked. So I'm still learning myself, but I still am happy to not check bags. And then finally, as I talked about, just know what types of visas and vaccinations are required. You can go to the CDC's website, or you can go to a local travel health clinic. So much to say about traveling. It is a privilege to be able to do so. Travel has been in my bones since I started doing so domestically when I was young, and I'm really grateful to be able to do it now, and especially in a way that I can incorporate it into my business and bring other people along. Thanks to everybody who came with us to Northern Italy. Thanks to everyone who's already booked for Croatia and Japan, and hopefully the Dordogne. We have a couple spots left in Croatia, and I'd love you to join us. Once again, the relationships I saw formed and the incredible people I got to spend time with is just an absolute gift. So thank you for letting us spoil you and help you do this in a way that is prioritizing compassion and ethics and animals over anything else. So for the animals, this is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau. Thanks for listening.